create conflict. Conflict is very wasteful. Conflict creates a lot of this variability and uncertainty. Let's reduce that. So I think initially think about long-term energy policy on a national scale, and then allow that decision-making process, that existential question, to go internationally. And then within the national scale, sometimes the question is, what is best? What is right? What is good? That is a very difficult question, and it always depends. It depends on a person's values, and those values are very local. An individual in Massachusetts has different values than a person in Germany or Texas or Canada or Beijing. And how you value your things that are closest to your heart, that is marriage, education of your children, policing of your hometown. These are things I think that are best left to a very local level, which can be variable along the political cycle. But things that are of larger consequences, these larger outcomes, these existential issues, the survivability of the human race, the effects of carbon, the effects of pollution, the effects of population. These are things that need to be addressed on a global scale. And to some degree, we need to think about sacrificing some of our freedoms, so to speak. And I'm a very pro-believer in individual freedom, but we all live in a global community. I can't just go out to New Jersey and dump my garbage. That would be irresponsible of me, and that would hurt somebody else.
But if someone else were to pick up your garbage and then dump it in New Jersey,
I would have problems with that.
If you knew, right?
Yeah. So I mean, we do that. We have our garbage collected and taken and dropped off in New Jersey, and we pay for that. These are things that on a local scale we have decided. On a global scale, we need to think about where we're going to be going, because if we cannot agree, if we cannot come together and reduce the conflict, we cannot reduce the amount of debate to an area where we're not able to sit across the table from one another.
Well, it was interesting the way that you had initially set that up. You were talking about different cities around the world, right? And how do we get everyone on the same page, right? There's a possibility that, if you look at all those cities, you probably see at least a few Teslas in each of those cities, right? So this is back to the argument earlier, which is, how do you make something as cool as a Tesla? And by the way, there are issues with the way, the energy that gets put into your Tesla could be generated by whatever, not the most efficient way. But at least you have a system that's being built now that eventually could be facilitated by a greener system, right? So, but how do you get people to, from an analogy standpoint, buy the Tesla instead of the Prius? And I think that is, who would, the Prius has been around for a very long time, right? And many car companies, by the way, there are electric cars that created in the same, when the automobile was coming up, it was gas that ended up becoming the more predominant way to fuel them, right? But why was it that the car companies that have been around for decades and decades and decades, why did they not take a stance to develop something like a Tesla? Why did it have to be an outside player that comes in and makes something that kind of changes the entire industry? Because you've seen very quickly after that, all the remaining players then change because it's been proven out somewhere else, or they see that consumers are then approaching that in a certain way. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, where do we create, or what are the Teslas of carbon capture and this? And I'm not talking about buying from a company that plants trees to offset their private jet flying carbon offset, whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking, how do you create something that is fundamentally more efficient and create something maybe that is like the local nuclear reactors that are then able to then fund that and make energy essentially almost free, to then allow people to actually use what they currently have versus doing a reductionary or reactionary type of approach.
Yeah. So this reactionary type of approach, these are short-term solutions. These are things that you see an issue and, hey, I'm going to go portable nuclear, or I'm going to make a Tesla. Now, the Tesla, and it's an electric car. We've had electric cars a long time ago, but what we didn't have was efficient energy storage. You couldn't store that energy, electric power very effectively. Now, I'd say that these are things that are in this short-term small solutions, and there are going to be different solutions from different places. Teslas might be great in one area. Teslas might not be good in another area. Portable nuclear could be one place, but not good for another place.
Right.
Maybe coal is better in certain areas, even though it's very inefficient. Shouldn't necessarily outlaw coal.
Right.
Gas power may be very useful because, hey, it's portable. I can carry a canister of gas up the mountain as opposed to having a helicopter fly a battery up the mountain. And I'm not going to be able to use my battery up there because I don't have any solar source. Maybe I can bring a nuclear stuff there, but I don't have the technical capacity to do so. So I think these are short-term solutions. These are small-scale solutions. I think those are all good, and we should have a great variety, a great spectrum of opportunities. But again, I wanted to go back to sort of my original premise is to have a longer-term policy with respect to energy and production and use. Because without that, we cannot tell people we're doing this because of this, and we've all agreed upon it. We've all agreed upon this because it involves so many different things and so many different potentially political factors. So, for example, productivity. We have acknowledged that we're going to take a hit in our productivity because of COVID. This is something that happened. This is something that also we could have considered as a factor in our long-term policy with respect to vaccination, with respect to immigration, with respect to travel from foreign countries. If we had really considered some of these things, the issues of transmittable diseases have been out there for a long period of time, and it's not high on the spectrum of political agendas that, hey, we should be addressing these things. And we've always thought that there will be a new a disease like AIDS coming out of Africa fairly soon, like Ebola. People were going crazy about Ebola because they thought that was going to be the new thing. It didn't. But this issue has been around for a long period of time. If we can come up with a palatable political strategy to address these long-term issues, then that will drive a lot of the policies that we can employ on a short term. So, for example, hey, maybe we need to promote electric cars in a certain area, like California is doing. Oh, I want electric cars all over the place. That might be great for California, according to what they want in a short term. It might be that we have portable nuclear, and we should be promoting portable nuclear. Or instead of promoting something, let's reduce something. Let's reduce the influx of state-to-state migration. Let's keep people home. And so let's work from home for a long time. Let's keep people working from home instead of commuting. If we start thinking about long-term policies that we can all agree upon, then that will help drive the shorter-term policy. So if we say reduce the uncertainty of political consensus as to climate change, hey, we all agree 99% that humans have induced the changes we are seeing in the climate.
Right, but isn't there still an issue, like the point earlier about even if the U.S. makes this decision, or you'd essentially need a global approach and adoption, which would be extremely difficult, right? We can barely get
For climate change.
For climate change,
Okay.
Sure, yeah. or anything really. I mean, there's so many factors in play, and I'm playing devil's advocate here because I'm curious how these solutions really get fixed, or if we're just playing with ourselves and not realizing that everything we're doing is not really taking us where we want to go.
Yeah.
And that's why I bring up this whole, how do we capture carbon more quickly? How do we create an environment where people aren't told to hold back, which nobody likes to do, and instead told to pour the gas on it, right?
Let me give a concrete example that has been effective. So we had the Montreal Protocol, which relates to climate, a while back, and it looked at CFCs specifically as a pollutant, a global warming potential, but also in how these chemicals hurt the ozone. That is, reduce the ozone layer, which protects us from harmful UVs. That was very effective, actually. It was very effective on an international scale. And there are other reasons why. It was palatable for consumers because it only affected a small segment of products. And the negative externalities were of the producers of these products. And so these refrigerants, certain things that uses these chemicals, they were hurt. But that was a small segment of industry. So that was effective, and we have seen positive results of the healing, so to speak, of the ozone layer. So that was effective. There's an assumption somehow that if we just apply the same mechanism with the International Panel for Climate Change with respect to tailpipe emissions, let's just deal with that. But actually, it's not just tailpipe emissions. There are many things. There's travel, jet travel, and there's methane, the beef industry, the use of land use. In addition, consumption, generally consumption, and how we need to use these carbon products, petroleum products for our consumer goods. Now, again, I think if we had greater confidence in some of that underlying issue, we do believe 99% confidence that we have a discernible influence on climate, then we'd have the second question, and that's where the second conversation is so important, is what to do. And that's where we should be focused on, what to do. Because that what to do, instead of saying, hey, I don't trust the science about the information that there is actually global warming, let's instead focus on what we should do and what we want. Because
the question becomes, why does it even come down to trust, right? If something should be more efficient, could it potentially also be cheaper? Could it give you the same output as something else? Because if you're looking at two different products and one is cheaper and it happens to be better for the environment, isn't that a no-brainer from somebody who doesn't have the data, who isn't reading the box and the reports and all those different things? You know, it's the same thing in like the design field. When someone spends more time designing something, it gets a premium, right? But the brands that are the most successful also have good design because they make it affordable, right? IKEA is, a hugely successful billion-dollar company because it takes those design elements but makes it accessible, something you can build at home, and really changes what the access people have to certain types of products. So even you could develop out some of those solutions, and instead of having to convince tooth and nail people, agencies, whatever it might be, just create a better product that's cheaper and more efficient, and you remove all those boundaries of bureaucracy and all that other stuff that comes into play.
Oh, certainly. If you had a solution, but then you would need to know first is why, what we should be doing, what do we want to do,
right?
And from the consumer, sometimes the consumer side will drive that product cycle, right? I need this. Young families, when they're first starting out, IKEA is a great solution. I bought my furniture when I first started out as well. And they've made a very efficient product that satisfied that demand. But if on a government basis or a bureaucratic basis, we want to maybe manipulate that demand we want to promote an industry instead of having IKEA come up on it on its own accord, then we should say, hey, what should we be doing? So if we had that consensus, at least, and I say start with the U.S. because other countries have this as well, and let us be the leader on these things and say we're going to take this out of the political cycle and have a committee such as the Federal Open Market Committee to address these things, have thought leaders, stakeholders in the oil petroleum industry, in agriculture, to talk about these things. Say, hey, if we want to say, I have a confidence level that reduction of tailpipe emissions would provide X, we're going to allocate that voice to this, that percentage. Let's say 40%. I'm going to give you 40% of that talk, and let's say it's 20% is agriculture. I'm going to say we're going to address this issue. Let's find solutions for that 20%. Let's find that solution for that 40% to come to a level that is palatable, and say, hey, these are the proposals. And you'll just like what we do with a lot of things is the government will send out requests for proposals. Say, here's how we address these questions. Now we do that with National Science Foundation, and say, for example, carbon capture. How do we capture carbon? Because that's right now the no-brainer. It's in the atmosphere. Well, let's take it out of the atmosphere. Do that in the same way with these different inputs. Instead of looking at just the coal industry and putting scrubbers on the smokestacks, instead of cleaning up the fuel systems, making more efficient cars, let's instead look at that piece of that puzzle as its contributing factor, as opposed to instead of, let's say, 100%, it's only 40%. And then you make it a much more efficient mechanism. Then you apply that, say, I'm going to promote this science. I'm going to promote this research in this science to find a solution, find a creative solution. 'Cause it might not just be an electric car. It might just be something like a Segway. Hey, I'm going to use my new device to provide the same benefit as this legacy technology.
Well, I guess also, one place where the science could help is indicating where the gold is. And what I mean by that is, why did Americans, in the gold rush, flee, which was, a treacherous journey, right, to California, because the thought of gold, right, of be able to find gold, right? And they did a lot of the hard work in hopes of finding that gold and creating a better life for themselves, right? So it's not always necessarily, I could see the data being used to say, this is how much, of this carbon or this issue, this is what it could possibly generate as an industry, and let the people take the treacherous journey and attempt to be a winner in that space, right? You have to ask, like, why did Elon start the electric car company that then kind of shifted the whole industry, right? It's because he believed that was a more efficient way and better for the environment. Not everyone is going to operate under that same, obviously, because we don't have that many, or have never had that many Elon Musks. But I guess, how do you make it abundantly clear for the people who are able to organize a group of people, whether it's scientists, engineers, whatever it might be, to then produce a product that has already been validated by, I think, which the science community could do from a data perspective and a research perspective, to then drive those entrepreneurs and those creators to find solutions there?
Yeah, well, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, right? And if there's a need, there's a demand for something, people said, hey, I want this.
Yeah.
An entrepreneur will come up and they'll provide that. If you're looking at someone who's coming up with an invention, I work on patents, that creates a different spark of ingenuity. Elon Musk's solution, assuming that was his solution, it might have been a top-down innovation. Okay, I see this. There's need in in the consumer world for this product, I can make this happen. I can get it to happen. And then you provide something that consumers will get drawn to. I think, again, going back to what should be, paint a picture of how you see yourself or how you live in X many years. Do you want to live in a log cabin? Do you want to drive a Tesla? Do you want to wear certain types of clothes and things like that? Where you see yourself. And from a consumer point of view, maybe that's a way of persuading people this is what we like. There are many Gretas in this world who would do these things on their own initiative, whether or not it's economically beneficial. They feel a value in it themselves just by doing it. Many people who give to charity, they don't necessarily think that there's a benefit to themselves, but the benefit to themselves is in the giving, the act of giving. They feel that, hey, I'm going to do this, and it creates some kind of a moral efficiency, so to speak.
Yeah, potentially, right? You could be giving to a charity that uses that inefficiently, spends more than a large percentage of it on administrative tasks.
Mm-hmm.
You could also give it potentially to capture tax advantages. I mean, you could live in a log cabin, even though you may not really consume that much or produce that much carbon in your life, right? And there's people that have made the decision not to have children because they don't want to, put them into the world and take up more carbon and all that other stuff. But the other people that have that opposing view, will have less people to battle and argue on many different levels, once they come to power, right? If just on the way that the population decreases.
Yes. You're reducing your voting power by making that choice. Yeah, certainly.
Right.
Well, listen, the question of climate change sometimes to me is really why we disagree about climate change. And for me, there's a lot of factors. Different people have different values. Different people have different time frames about what they think they want to do. Mm-hmm. For example, again, going back to values, Bill Gates would prefer to spend money on mosquito netting to save lives, to avoid great people dying from malaria, as opposed to putting monies in other areas. Bjorn Lomborg would look at it from an economic perspective. Do we want to spend the money now to the costs of transitioning to an electric economy, with all of the negative externalities of that, or do we want to take a slower route, or do we want to take a shift and invest in nuclear, for example, to produce that electricity? If you look at it from different perspectives, people have different values. So again, if you think about the long-term perspective, it may be that you would spend more money later so that you can enjoy what you have now to greater effect, so that you can achieve the things that you need to do more effectively to provide the same benefit, as opposed to reduce your output today. That sometimes involves a calculation of the sort of time value of money, to understand whether or not you want to invest these dollars today as opposed to create that solution tomorrow. For example, hey, if we spent $100 today to reducing carbon emissions, as opposed to mitigating the effects 10 years from now. And to mitigate the effects 10 years from now would only cost $110. That would involve an equation of what is the value of the money. Today's value versus tomorrow's value. If you think about children, if you are deciding to have children or not to have children, You might have a different understanding of, I would rather spend my money today on myself and my activities today to be productive today to the economy, versus, hey, I want to save my money and preserve that for myself and for my children. There's a different calculus. If you think about, hey, I want to preserve this national forest here, I'm more concerned about my the green in the U.S. than in Africa, for example. That's a different calculus.
Right. And all of those things don't matter unless you're able to exist as a nation, right? So if there, a different country in the world somehow overtakes the U.S. or overtakes democracy and freedom, all those things really don't matter. So what's interesting is it seems like the U.S. has kind of taken a perspective under the guise that there's no other threats to the U.S. and its behavior, at least to me, of a country that doesn't feel like it's touchable. And I think when you work under that presumption and it turns out not to be true, you spent too much attention in the wrong places.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the biggest risk, right? If within 40 years the entire climate turns to shit, but the only thing that's left is essentially a George Orwell, 1984 landscape, was it worth whatever the attempt was, right? So there's all these things on like the hierarchy of what's important, and of course, you could easily say there are people who are actively engaged in those areas, are ensuring that doesn't happen. You've got a defense sector that's the largest, I think, in the world, right? So of course there's other things that you can focus on. It doesn't have to be that sole focus. But I think that if there's a world where you have a world that's not worth living in, what's the point of being super efficient if everyone there is living like they are in North Korea now, eating insects and barely surviving, So there's you almost want to ensure those things first. You make sure the house isn't on fire anymore, and then you go to fix the sink.
Right.
And it seems like there's potentially people with matches or things that are on fire that are constantly kind of marching towards your direction. Maybe that's not even touched upon, right? It's like, how easily could I distract the American economy or the population just by talking about climate change, just about talking about abortion and those things, and the efficiency of America in the larger landscape of the world.
Yeah. I think we're definitely undervaluing certain risks and overvaluing others. I believe that climate change is a risk, but it's a risk that should be put in its proper place. And the evolution of our economies, these are also changes which we should look into in the long term. Right now we are so focused on small, short-term goals right now, and that's actually creating greater risks to our long-term objectives, to our long-term values. If we put these things in perspective, having stability in the world is much more important than certain intangibles and difficult to define values. For example, with Ukraine and Russia and Europe right now. It's very hard to understand what we're doing in some of our decision making there with the potential risks that are involved. Instead, look at these things from stability point of view. Our economy has grown tremendously because of the ability of our banking system to maintain a fairly regulated temperature in our economy to provide foreseeability for businesses, foreseeability for people and their prices and how they can spend their money. If we had economies that fluctuate to such a degree as Venezuela, we would not be able to maintain these things. So again, I would say put our focus on long-term values, and especially thinking about very simple equation: energy and production and happiness, to allow people to do what they want to do. And listen, if you want to choose to buy a Prius or electric car, that's fine. We will all make our decisions, but to have that long-term energy solution is paramount.
Just a quick question. You've talked about happiness a few times. I guess I guess what role does that play? And I guess I just have a few comments on it after.
Yeah, I mean, happiness, varies by individual, and sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm happy." Many people think, people in the U.S., you always think you're awesome and excellent and great. Everything is happy. Or if you look at some Europeans, you say, "Oh, I'm not happy. I can't be happy. I got to struggle." Or if you look at Bhutan, they measure their productivity as gross domestic happiness. That's something that is a high value to that country.
Which country is
that? In Bhutan.
Oh.
Bhutan it's a mountain country sitting right next to China and Nepal, and they measure their goals, their national goals, as gross domestic happiness. And I think these are good things. Those are their values. What is happiness? Sometimes happiness is defined by the reduction of displeasure or pain. And so if we're, as a society, allowing a number of individuals to have homes, have food, have security.
But have people been happy without those things?
Certainly.
The issue with happiness is it's constantly a moving target, right? There's a great saying, the mind can make heaven out of hell and hell out of heaven. So it really lies within the individual, right? Things happen to one person and they label it as traumatic, and the same exact thing could happen to someone else, and they could see that as just another day. So that's where that gets tough, right? There's people who are billionaires who are not happy at all. There's people living in shacks that are just happy, to be out of the rain, right? So that's almost like I don't want to say personal responsibility, but I think it's definitely something. I don't know even if it's awareness. There are people who are potentially happy that are ignorant to certain things that someone who knows much more. That's interesting. I also think if you have to be slightly unhappy, right, to change things around you. No one says, I want to go start a company or go through the hardships of getting elected, having your whole world open so that you could eventually be happy. But instead, it's more so that you take on some kind of conquest, and either you end up with an epic victory or an epic story. And that's kind of the fun of life, right? We're humans. We have a bunch of different reactions happening inside of us, and part of that is feeling happy, and part of it is feeling sad, and those are all good things because those are things that you're able to experience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting on would you rather have a stable, free country that you would be potentially less happy, but you've got the stability and ability to be more free. And also you have the freedom to be happy or not to be happy, right? I'm sure there's places around the world where people are asked to put on a smile, either put in harsh conditions and told to fake happiness, as if that's something that is crucial to life, right?
Yeah. Well, I long term, I think we are all in it together. So internationally, I think we should be concerned about stability as a promotion of the ability to be happy, because without stability, you will not have the ability to choose that sort of bandwidth of displeasure. Hey, I can choose stress as a fun way of spending my time. I'll go rock climbing where I have the potential of falling to my death. Go free climbing without a rope, for example. That would be very stressful.
Right. Or exhilarating.
Yeah. Right. But I would choose that. But if I didn't have sort of a base level of security, food or a shelter to go back to, I would not be able to embark upon that expedition. I think at least if we are going to continue on with a bounded sphere, which is where we are. We're on this big blue marble in the middle of nowhere, where we all have to get along together, is to maintain some semblance of security of a tomorrow. And to do so, we need to reduce, again, I think some of the fractiousness that occurs from dependence of energy, and to allow ourselves, hey, in order for us to agree to consume this global commons that we're living together on Earth, is to allow ourselves, each entity, each country, the ability to produce and consume energy for happiness, however they choose to be happy. But I agree with you. It's really a lot within your own mind, and I'll just say I've had a traumatic events happen to me in 2013 where I almost died, and I was on the operating table. I didn't know I was going to survive. I am a much happier person after, actually, and I look at that as a defining moment that I was able to look at life differently, and what I want and what it means to be living and what to do in one's life,
right,
and how you treat everyone around you.
Right.
It's something that instead, before, I did not have that perspective. I gained afterwards. I look at that as a gift from Providence.
Right.
And aside from the fact that it created some problems for me in the future. It is about what you see. Now, if we are allowed to provide a certain base level of security for individuals to live and be free, they can choose to do these things. They can sit at home and watch Lifetime movies 24/7, if that's what makes you happy, or you can go rock climbing with the threat of death, if that makes you happy. Or you can go out to do gain an enterprise, changing the world, or not.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting because you'll see some people, like, for instance, you could say Olympians or business people who are 24/7, or anyone who devotes himself to a certain goal, task, vision, whatever it might be. And from the people on the outside, you may say, oh, that person may be insane because maybe they're not showering, they're working too much, they're sticking to this crazy diet, they're doing things that are unnatural, right?
Yeah.
So in their way of viewing the world, right? And then at the same time, that person who's in conquest of some vision, if they've ever thought about it, was, within your own family, we've talked about this a few times on this podcast, you look back 200 years, you don't know much about your great whatever, or grandparents or whoever that was, right? So even what you're doing is effectively leading you to it not having any greater purpose versus building on your current kind of time and presence in the world, right? So that pursuit of happiness, because what happens when you get that gold medal, when you sell that company for $1 billion, when whatever it is, you sit there, you've got the bank account, you've got the gold next to you, right? But what's next, right? It's almost like, if our objective is to then solve issues and continually do that, you can also do that theoretically until there are no more issues, potentially, and then you create new issues that are not really based in
there are always going to be issues. The single secret of the universe is that there's an infinite possibility of what can be done. Anything the mind can conceive of is
Right.
possible.
Right.
And I really like the idea of having at least sort of the existential, at least if we want to look at these things internationally, the existential view of we want to secure ourselves with security of the global commons, to provide a certain minimal level of energy for people to produce these things. And then on the small scale, allow everyone to have the freedom to do whatever crazy thing they want to do. And on the smallest and smallest scale, the craziest possible thing. So even if we talk about, let's say, a federal versus a state system, national versus international, large to small, allow greater variety in the smallest scale, to allow people to then choose their path for happiness. Hey, if I want to go to Bhutan and practice this type of life, I can do that.
Right.
If I want to go to Texas that allows this type of activity, I can do that. If I
Right.
want to go to Russia and I live that place, I can do that. To allow people to experience the fullness of what is possible.
And their pursuits, right? Because everything that's created is then also left behind for the next generation, right? Who invented the microphone? You probably don't know. I can't recall or know, right? But we're able to sit here and actually use that, right?
Yes.
And whether that person made a lot of money, eventually died, that money gets redistributed to family, the economy, people, and eventually it evens out the playing field. Right. So, there's something interesting in that. There's pursuits to make meaning of the time that you have, right? That's the asset. Would you give up everything you have just to go back to being 20 again, right? I think most people would probably, depending on how far you are from 20, right? But I think there's something interesting about that too, is how do you create a society where there isn't one Elon Musk, there aren't 5, there's 8 billion, right? And the way you get that done is you're able to then mobilize, in any company, you're mobilizing people, they're coming together for a common goal. But if you didn't need people and you could use robots or you could use AI or things of that nature, right? It's easier to start a company today probably than ever in history, right? Just because of the capital that you have to put into it, the resources you have access to, the tools that are available digitally and things like that, right? So if every person was allowed to be their own Elon Musk, then how much quicker would you advance and get to wherever the next place is going? Because I think the biggest travesty is you've got people, and I've spent time in factory settings who do very mundane things, but they're just crushed by a certain amount of circumstance, where they were born, the way their parents taught them, things like that. But if you created a setting where those things were absolved and you were able to truly live up to your potential and your interests, I think the world becomes an interesting place.
It does, but I go back to, it's really what is good, what is best, what do we want? From my perspective, I gave what I think is best. What I think is best is to have stability, and stability internationally, so that we don't have such potentially problematic wars, or situations where our existence is at stake. But that's my perspective. Now maybe you don't want that. Maybe a national interest would be, I want to rouse my populace to take over this neighboring country because that is my interest, without regards to whatever else might happen. But again, that's just my perspective. Listen, I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It was a lot of fun to talk.
Thanks, Doug.
And I hope we can do this again next time.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And,
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. More episodes are available here on this platform and other main platforms where podcasts are heard. Thanks for drinking with us. Stay hungry. Stay foolish.